Grace Point, come on, stand up with us. Glad you're here. Y'all looking great. If you know it, sing it with us. I feel like new sunglasses, like a brand new pair of jeans. I feel like taking chances. I feel a lot like 17. Like windows roll down new city streets and cabs. I feel like anything can happen. Laughing, you take me right back to when we were kids. Never thought I'd feel like this. Like when I close my eyes and don't even care. Like I can fly and don't even think of touching the ground. Like a heartbeat skip, like an open page, like a one-way trip on an aeroplane. It's the way that I feel when I'm with you. Brand new. like a young John Cusack, like making big mistakes. I feel like for the first time in a long time, I am not afraid. I feel like a kid. Never thought I'd feel like this. Like when I close my eyes and I don't even care if anyone sees me dancing. Like I can fly and I don't even think I'm touching the ground. Like a heartbeat skip, like an open page, like a one-way trip on an aeroplane. It's the way that I feel when I'm with you. Brand new. Time will always try to make us whole. You remind me what I used to know. Sing that with me. Here we go. Like when I close my eyes and don't even care if anyone sees me dancing. Like I can fly and I don't even think touching the ground. Like a heartbeat skip, like an open page, like a one-way trip on an aeroplane. It's the way that I feel when I'm with you. Brand new. I feel brand new. I feel brand new. I feel brand new. Yeah, I feel brand new. You can be seated.
Hi, we're Robert and Lori Hollinger. We're from Central Indiana, and we've been attending Grace Point for about 2 years.
Know that whether you are in person, whether you are online, or wherever you are in the world, you are welcome, accepted, celebrated, and loved here.
Welcome home to Grace Point.
Enjoy the service. Do you think they'll understand our signs?
You're so right. We're glad that you are with us today. We want you to take a look around, make eye contact with a couple of people, wave at them, blow them a kiss, do an air five. We just want you to make sure that you're seen and that everybody knows that they are here and valued and welcome in this place. We do have a couple of announcements for you.
Good morning, Grace Point. My name is Blythe, and I have your announcements for you today. It's so great to be here with everybody. First, can we just give a little warm welcome to our online community? Give them a round of applause. Woo! All right, so first off, if you want to access these weekly announcements online, or if you want to fill out your connection card, you can use the QR code on your table to do that. You can also give online through that QR code. Grace Point is in need of volunteers, whether you feel called to lead worship or help set up and tear down. If you want to do that and see yourself in that role, you can go to gracepoint.net/band to be a peer, or you can go to gracepoint.net/volunteer for other opportunities. And once again, that's Gracepoint with an E. So we're having a community gathering at Disc Insider on Sunday, October 24th from 4 to 6 p.m. That's going to be a family-friendly as well as a dog-friendly event. And they have a small food menu as well as non-alcoholic beverages if you're interested in that. So before we get into the service, I want to remind you that we can't do what we do without you and without your financial support. So there are 3 ways to give. Like I said, you can use that QR code on your table, or you can text Grace Point with an E to 77977, or go to gracepoint.net/give. So I think that's everything. So thanks, y'all.
We invite you to stand with us again. And again, I know it's kind of hard to sing under those masks, but as much as you can, as much as you want to, we'd love for you to join us in this beautiful song today.
Come and tear down the walls that are built, every wall that's been built, every wall that's been built. 'Cause you are the peace in my heart, every piece of my heart, every piece of my heart. Lord, I am trusting that you will be faithful to me, and all that you have that is good. You're a generous giver, your love's like no other. Won't you come and break through to me over and over and over again? I am bringing my heart to you with open hands. Closer and closer, you're drawing me in as the depths of my heart lay before you again.
I'll sing that.
Over and over and over again, I am bringing my heart to you with open hands. Closer and closer, you're drawing me in as the depths of my heart lay before you again. Lord, I am trusting that you will be faithful to me, and all that you have it is good. You're a generous giver, your love's like no other. Won't you come and break through to me over and over and over again? I am bringing my heart to you with open hands. Closer and closer, you're drawing me as the depths of my heart lay before you again. Come and tear down the walls that are built, every wall that's been built, every wall that's been built. 'Cause you are the peace of my heart, every piece of my heart, every piece of my heart. Over and over and over again, I am bringing my heart to you with open hands. Closer and closer, you're drawing me in as the depths of my heart lay before
Sing that
you
again, over and
again. Over and over and over again, I am bringing my heart to you with open hands. Closer, closer, you're drawing me in as the depths of my heart lay before you again. Come and tear down the walls that every wall that's been built, every wall that's been built. 'Cause you are the peace of my heart, every piece of my heart, every piece of my heart. Come and tear down the walls that are built, every wall that's been built, every wall that's been built. 'Cause you are the peace of my heart, every piece of my heart, every piece of my heart. Tear down the walls that are built, every wall that's been built, every wall that's been built. 'Cause you are the peace of my heart, every piece of my heart, every piece of my heart.
Amen. You can be seated. Thank you.
Hey, everybody, let's thank our band this morning, can we? Thank you. Well, it is so good to see you, whether you're here at Third and Lindsay or whether you're joining us on YouTube. We are so glad you're here. Last week, I wasn't here in person. Last week, you heard a pre-recorded sermon. I was up in the air flying in a plane, not on my own. That's not a skill I have. So I thought I'd just tell you a little bit about our trip. So we got gifted this trip to Disney World. What? Okay, good. We got gifted this trip to Disney World for our kids, and so we were there all week. We came back yesterday, so yesterday afternoon, we get to the airport, and it was a late flight we were scheduled for. We were supposed to get back to Nashville at 11 p.m. last night, and so we get to the airport for our 6 o'clock flight, and they're like, oh, well, it's actually going to be at 11. And our Atlanta flight, the connecting flight, was supposed to leave at 11. So we're like, I don't know what we're going to do. And so we're like, well, we can't do this. So we're going to have to rent a car and drive, because I have to be here. So we're going to rent a car and drive home from Orlando. And we get down like in the place where we just turned in a rental car and was like, hey, can we get that back? So I get in this line, and this woman working the counter says to me, sir, are you like a Platinum Rewards member or an executive so-and-so? I said, no, I'm a man in crisis. And she said, I'm sorry, we can't help you. And so we literally, they were like telling us there were no cars. And then my wife finds a car online at Avis. Thank goodness for Avis. And it was a Suburban. It was going to fit all of 24 of our people, all of our luggage, and we were going to drive home through the night. And we get over into the car and push the foot on the brake and push the button, and it doesn't work. And then we have to move to another car. And it was just this. So we drove through the night last night. We got in about 4 a.m. And I'm just so refreshed and thrilled. And so I hope you are too. But a couple moments that really stood out to me over the course of our time. One of them was on Monday of last week, we had tickets to SeaWorld. And there's this moment where we were trying to move because we ended up, I was trying to tell everybody, like, I know you want to get splashed on, but we are on the first row and we are going to drown. This is not going to be fun. So we moved back up several rows. As we were moving back up several rows, our youngest, we look over, he's following us up, and he's got his tongue on the handrail, licking it all the way up. And I just looked at him and was like, you live here now. We're not bringing you home. Like, I don't know what you have done. I don't know what got into you. I don't know what thought process is going to. You know what I'm going to do? I'm curious about what that handrail tastes like, right? So that was the one moment. And we ended up bumping into these people who are from the town we moved from. And we had this really short conversation. Turns out the guy's mom used to come to the church I used to pastor. And we're having this little small world moment. And he's like, yeah, I saw your kid lick the handrail. Are you kidding me? You saw my kid lick the handrail. So that happened. There were lots of great little moments, but there's this one of our kiddos has autism, and she struggles with transitions, and Disney World was sensory overload. And so every time we would get off a ride, she'd be upset. And for some reason, this particular week, she loved me more than anyone else on the planet. So she wanted to ride on my shoulders, and she was sitting on my shoulders. It was 2,000 degrees, and she's just screaming her head off. And Carl looks around, and she says, how you doing? I said, I'm blessed. And my oldest, Cohen, comes over, and he goes, God is with you. God is on your side. And I was like, yes, somebody listened to a sermon in the Beatitudes series. And I was like, okay, I feel like I've had my own shtick put back on me. All in all, it was a really great trip. It was such a gift to get to do that and be there, and to get to see our kids, experience all those wonderful, fun, and terrific things. Disney World, I was there in 1990. It's changed a bit since then, and so it was a gift. Today, we're continuing our Signs and Wonders series. And as we begin to do that, I think last week we looked at Jesus turning water into wine, and how that isn't just sort of like, cool, look what he can do, but it has this larger implication of something new is happening. And will we be spacious enough? Will we be flexible enough? Will we be prepared to be a part of the new thing that might be happening in the world? And so, but before we jump into this second sign, which happens in chapter 4, I thought it may be helpful for us to look through what happens between the signs. So first, it's actually chapter 2, water is turned into wine. It's the first sign. After that, in chapter 2, Jesus goes into the temple and does this symbolic prophetic demonstration. Now, here's why we begin to get a clue that John is not operating chronologically. Because this event in the temple, scholars pretty much universally agree, this was the event that likely sealed the death warrant for Jesus. This is likely where the temple action is likely where it's decided we can't let this go unpunished. And yet John has it at the beginning, but it follows this idea of water to wine. And so there's something new happening. Jesus does this thing in the temple. And I actually think everything that happens between signs 1 and 2 are interpretive of signs 1 and 2. So there's the temple action. And then Jesus in chapter 3, he meets this person named Nicodemus, who's a Pharisee, who's a religious leader, who comes to Jesus at night, and they have this really interesting conversation where Nicodemus asks Jesus, like, what's the whole deal? And Jesus is like, well, if you want to participate in what God's doing, the kingdom of God, this movement, then you have to be born. And does anybody know what the next word is? Born again. That's how it gets translated, but it's actually probably more literally born from above, which is sort of this, you have to have this new sort of life, this new sort of awakening, this new sort of awareness. And Nicodemus, being the literalist, says to Jesus, how can a person crawl back into their mother's womb and be born again? And I think this is the writer saying to us, if you are taking this literally, you are in the shoes of Nicodemus. You're not in the shoes of what I'm trying to do. Because Nicodemus is trying to read this gospel at a literal, or trying to embrace this gospel at a literal level. And at a literal level, this will not make sense. Because there are some things that are so profoundly true, some things that are so transformative, that you can only begin to speak about them in the language of metaphor. Do you know what I'm talking about? Like there are some things, like when you try to describe a feeling you've had, and it was maybe it was watching a sunset or whatever that was, but you try to describe this feeling you've had to another person, and you could go through like, well, here's what happens when the sun doesn't actually set. We're just spinning around and hanging on for your life, and there's all this stuff that happens. But if you were to try to like scientifically or literally explain it, all the magic would be gone. But there's something about talking about how it made you feel. There's something about talking about it at a heart level, at an emotional level. It did something to you. It triggered something in you. It opened up something in you. It inspired you. And the only language that we have for that is the language of metaphor, because everything else would be just so and boring. Can you imagine describing falling in love and just talking about it scientifically? Well, there's endorphins and there's serotonin and there's But nobody makes a movie about that, right? You don't watch movies called You've Got Serotonin. Does anybody still watch You've Got Mail? Is that still a thing people participate in on a regular basis? Some of you are like, what does that mean? It's back when email was new and I didn't think it was gonna catch on. I thought this is a fad, it'll never work. And yet here we are. And so there's this Nicodemus, we're being introduced to a message, a meaning that is more than literal, not less than literal. It's something Marcus Borg would talk about as a surplus of meaning. Right? There's something that means so much that there's so much leftover meaning that we have to begin talking about it in parable and in metaphor and in, well, it's sort of like this. And then in chapter 4, Jesus meets a Samaritan woman. He meets a Samaritan woman at a well. Anybody familiar with this story? She comes to the well. She ends up having a conversation with Jesus. He talks about living water that gushes up from the inside of us. What's interesting about this story, so you have Nicodemus, who's sort of a Jewish insider. Here you have a Samaritan woman. And to give you just a brief crash course in who the Samaritans were, because there was a lot of religious and racial animosity and tension between Samaritans and Jews in the first century. And here's why. In the 900s, sometime around the year 920, Solomon died. So you have David, and then you have his son Solomon. His son Solomon died, and then there was a civil war. And the north seceded from the south. And so you end up having the bulk of the Jewish people, the Israelites at the time, they go north, 10 tribes go north, 2 tribes stay in the south. In the south is where the temple is, in the south is where Jerusalem is. All these people have sort of seceded away and formed their own. So you have Israel in the north, the northern kingdom it's called. You have Judah in the south, the southern kingdom. And there's all this tension between them because everybody used to go to this one central location to worship. You go to the temple and you make pilgrimages to the temple, and that's where you go. And suddenly when you have broken off the relationship, there is no going to the temple. Now we have to find our own locations. We have to find our own experiences. And so that began cropping up in the north. They began sort of creating their own, and this is not a pejorative word, this is what people use for it. They sort of create their own cult, right? Their own place of worship, their own place of ritual. And instead of having one spot, they have multiple, but they have one that emerges as the central spot. And then there's all these other ones. And then in the year 721, an empire called Assyria comes in and wipes out the north. Those 10 tribes, they're lost to history. Nobody knows what happened to them other than Assyria came in, and Assyria had this really brutal practice. It's one thing to take a group of people and send them into exile somewhere else, but what they did was especially brutal. They would take people and put them, so if you lived in Israel, they may take you and put you over here somewhere that you're not familiar with, and then they would take another group of people they conquered and they would put them in your land. And because in the ancient world, when you believe your land is connected to your God, if you're still in your land, then there's revolution. Our God's going to do this thing for us, and we're going to get our land back, and we're going to bring our people, or we're going to have control of ourselves again. So they left behind a few people. Generally, they would leave behind people who were poor, who were sick, who were no threat to them. And so the Israelites who were left behind, who were poor and sick and no threat to them, ended up intermarrying with whatever people group they brought in. And this produced a group of people called the Samaritans. And so in Jesus' day, when the northern and southern kingdom were gone, and there's just Judea, there was still this animosity because the Samaritans still believed they should worship here. And Jews believe they should worship in Jerusalem, which is this woman's conversation with Jesus. Okay, so you're Jewish, you're talking to me, you shouldn't be talking to me. Not only am I a woman, but I'm a woman of, you find out in the story that in that particular time and place, she would have been a woman who had a reputation that wasn't great. And there were all these mitigating factors that should have been boundaries between Jesus and her. And he presses through them, and she says, okay, yeah, but let's get down to the real dispute. Where do you think we should worship? And Jesus sort of responds, well, like, neither there nor Jerusalem, because God's looking for people who will just sort of approach God and worship in what Jesus called spirit and truth, not bound by a particular geography or bound by a particular building or bound by a particular spot on a map. And so these sort of things flip. Jesus and Nicodemus, the faithful Jewish leader, Jesus and the Samaritan woman, and then we come to the story that is in chapter 4. And what we begin to see is that John isn't working at a chronological or literal level. Instead, John is speaking from a more than literal place. So if we read John and we're trying to figure out what Jesus did when within the bounds of history, we're going to be disappointed. If we come to John and ask the question, what was Jesus up to and what does it mean? We might be able to find something powerful. And here's the story. Then he came again to Cana in Galilee, where he had changed the water into wine. Now there was a royal official whose son lay ill in Capernaum. So in the Gospel of John, there's very little overlap with the other Gospels, the Matthew, Mark, and Luke. They actually don't tell many similar stories. There's one that all of them generally tell, and that's the story we'll look at later of the feeding of the 5,000, which is often coupled with walking on water. So there's that. This story is the closest really second we have, because I think it's Matthew and Luke who tell this story. Yep, Matthew and Luke. But in Matthew and Luke, it's a Roman centurion and that centurion's servant. In this story, it is a royal official, still to be understood, generally people think as a Gentile, and that person's son. When he heard that Jesus had come from Judea to Galilee, he went and begged him to come down and heal his son, for he was at the point of death. Jesus said to him, "Unless you see signs and wonders, you will not believe." The official said to him, "Sir, come down before my little boy dies." Jesus said to him, "Go, your son will live." The man believed the word that Jesus spoke to him and started on his way. As he was going down, his slaves met him and told him that his child was alive. So he asked them the hour when he began to recover, and they said to him, "Yesterday at 1 p.m, the fever left him." The father realized that was the hour when Jesus had said to him, "Your son will live." So he himself believed, along with his whole household. Now this was the second sign that Jesus did after coming to Judea to Galilee. Now remember, what is the point of John's gospel? John tells us at the end, "I've written these things so that you may believe in Jesus, so that you'll trust that this Jesus is worth believing in, is worth trusting. That's why I'm telling you these stories. So again, right here, cards on the table. This particular Gentile, this royal official, has this moment where he comes to Jesus, asks for help. Jesus says, go, your son is healed. He goes and finds out that indeed is the truth, and this royal official then believes and trusts in Jesus. I think it's important to remember the question we're asking about all these stories, not did it happen, right? Who knows if it happened? There's no proof either way that it did or didn't happen. We can get lost in the did or didn't happen rabbit trail forever and actually miss the point of the story we're being invited into. So the question in this story then is, if this is a sign, the second sign, and did y'all, how many of you were watching or here last week for I Saw the Sign by Ace of Base? Anybody here for that? Isn't that the perfect breakup song for evangelicalism? It's sort of like the it's not me, it's you. You know what I mean? Like, just wonderful. And so this is the second, thank you. I'm glad that it rolls, it hits you in waves. It's the second sign that Jesus performs. So what does the sign point to? And I want to just talk through a few things I think is going on here. First, I think the second sign, it points to us that the work of Jesus calls us to transcend the boundaries and break down the barriers that we've constructed that keep people in and out, that keep people, some people with access and some people without access. Because that's what we do in religious communities, right? All religion can tend toward this really reductionist, this is us and we're the good people and we're the insiders and we believe all the things, and then everybody else is an outsider. And it seems like what Jesus is doing, if you think through, like he's inviting people to transcend what they think is possible. Nicodemus, you can be born anew. Really? But how in the world would I ever go back into my mother's womb a second time? Nicodemus, you're missing the point. There is something you're being invited into. Your brain has constructed barriers as to what you think is possible. You think this is possible. A good, nice religious life, that's what's possible. There's actually something else. Maybe you think that maintaining boundaries of who's clean and unclean, who's in and out, who's acceptable. Maybe you think that is the height of what religion is here to give us. But Nicodemus, I'm telling you that when the scales fall off your eyes and you begin to see the world anew, when you begin to see the world with an awareness of God's great love for every single living, breathing, not just human being, but every single living, breathing entity in the world, everything is beloved. That can begin to transform everything for you. He sits down by a well in Samaria at noon, the heat of the day, and he ends up in an exchange with a woman who, in her brain, there are barriers. There are barriers to our friendship because you are Jewish and I am Samaritan. There are barriers to what we can talk about because I believe we worship here and you believe we worship over there. There are barriers because maybe I use this name for God and you use another name for God. There are all these things keeping us in the way of cooperation and collaboration and friendship. And Jesus comes to her and says, if you only knew what was possible, if you could only see the potential inside of you, that there is living water waiting to spring forth. That there is water. You're coming to this well every day and you're drawing the same water and you're going through the same labor-intensive process to carry it back. And I'm telling you, there is a kind of water that overflows you and transforms the world around you and quenches a thirst inside of you that you didn't maybe even know you had, or maybe you knew you had, and this is likely for many of us, a thirst in us that we knew we had, but we had no language to begin to describe it. But when you think about it, it's like, yeah, I'm thirsty. Yeah, there is something I am thirsty for that I have yet to encounter. In so many ways, isn't that the human experience? I mean, especially if you grew up Christian, especially if you grew up Christian like I did, like many of us did, where you're told right away that you enter the world and you're awesome, but you're also depraved and terrible and disconnected from God, and your entire life is trying to get back to where you should have been all along, instead of saying, actually, you were never disconnected from God. You enter the world in the belovedness of God, and you are embraced by God. And all of that journey we've been on is thirsting for something that is already within us. We don't have to hike a mountain and go to the stream. It is already within us. And Jesus is inviting this particular woman to transcend the boundaries and barriers and the idea of what is possible, and to see that what she is thirsting for is something already available and already accessible to her right there sitting by the well. She doesn't need anything to dip it out with. She just needs eyes to see it. And then there's this royal official, this Gentile. Gentiles were the 99%, right? Everybody who isn't Jewish. And there were very clear boundaries. And yet Jesus engages and actually pushes this Gentile, and we're going to talk more about this in a minute. He actually pushes the boundaries of this Gentile royal official as well. And invites him to see, actually, I'm not going to go to your house with you because your son's already healed. You don't need me to make the journey. What you're looking for is already there. All right, so the work of Jesus is this call to transcend the boundaries and barriers of who we think are in or out, or who we think is acceptable or unacceptable, or maybe what we think is possible. When I look at the world right now, in my most pessimistic of moments, I just feel like so many things are impossible. Anybody else there with me? Can we just have a pessimistic moment together? We're going to bring it around. But can we have a pessimistic moment together? Like, doesn't the world just feel overwhelmed with impossibility right now? When you think about the state of our country here in the United States alone, like the possibility of anything good happening, of anything bringing wholeness and healing to the fractures, anything bringing remedy to all of the fissures in our society, anything that would actually bring justice in our society feels so far away, doesn't it? And yet, are we just maybe not having eyes to see the potential all around us? That maybe everything we need, we have right in this room. And the only thing we lack is the awareness that it's there. The only thing we lack is the awareness that we have been invited to tap into, the new awareness, that we've been invited to tap into this water overflowing within us, that we've been invited to tap into this idea that this experience, we don't have to travel from here to there to get it, that it's already right here. John Shelby Spong said this: God is not a heavenly judge. Isn't that good news? God is not a heavenly judge. Does that make anybody else just go, whew, good? Because if God is a heavenly judge, everybody's in trouble. Right? If God is sort of watching us all with closed circuit televisions and keeping score, we are all in trouble. God is not a heavenly judge. God is a life-expanding force, expanding inside humanity until that humanity becomes barrier-free. God is a life-expanding force, expanding within us until all the barriers and boundaries that we've set up that prevent us from seeing what is are removed. I think Jesus also, his work is calling us to a larger vision of God. And if I could make a corny dad joke, this story where Jesus like heals from it, it's like telemedicine. Right? Like this is like Jesus should have trademarked this in the Gospel of John, because there's sort of this, hey, I don't have to travel with you. You just go and your son will be healed. It's this idea that for Jesus, the understanding of God isn't that there's a God up there somewhere who's separate and distant from us, who occasionally, if we say the right things, do the right things, believe the right things, if we get just the right selection of songs and the sermon is just so-so and there's the appropriate amount of funny and the appropriate amount of crying and all that sort of thing we're supposed to do to make church really good. If we get all of that stuff right in our life, if we do all the right things, then God will hear us and respond to us. Right? I think about it every time I hear somebody say the phrase, we just need as many people praying as possible so that God will do this. What kind of God? What kind of God has a quota? Right? I just think about my kids. If one of them had a skinned knee, I wouldn't only treat that if all 5 of them were crying. That surely can't be what God is like. Surely that can't be. And Jesus invites us to see this God who transcends our boundaries of what is possible. That there isn't this God who we keep in our box right here and occasionally let out on holidays. Otherwise, she might ask too much of us and embarrass us. We just keep her squirreled away in the back. That there's this God out there, up there, distant, disconnected, separate. But Jesus says, actually, there's this, like, I don't need to go there because there is already there. I love what Rob Bell says. Rob says, the moment that God is figured out with nice, neat lines and definitions, we are no longer dealing with God. And could it be that so much of the religious industrial complex is no longer dealing with God, but dealing with all sorts of stuff we've created about God, created to keep some people out and let some people in? All these idols of God we've created that justify us and condemn everybody else. Very small understandings of God that are really just created to give us security at the expense of everybody who sees it differently. It's almost like the minute you sit down with somebody who says, I'm going to tell you what God is and what God is like, that's when you need to run. Right? Because you are about to be sold a bill of goods that is much smaller than whatever the reality. I do not pretend to know who or what God is. That is above my pay grade. But I do have hints and guesses. And my new working assumption is, if I am better than or more compassionate than my understanding of God is too small. And I need to let go of it. And I think that's the invitation Jesus extends in the Gospel of John here, is moving beyond these really small ideas of God to a larger vision of God, a more expansive and ever expanding vision of God. It is okay for our understanding and a vision of God to change. Has that happened to anybody in this room? That 15 years ago, 10 years ago, 5 years ago, 25 minutes ago, your vision of God was much smaller than it is right now, that something happens to us over time where we have moments, experiences through human beings, through nature, through wherever we find ourselves, and we feel like our heart is being enlarged and expanded so that we can understand that God is bigger than we ever possibly could have begun to dream, and still bigger than we could ever possibly begin to dream. And finally, I think the sign being pointed to here is that the work of Jesus calls us beyond doctrine and dogma and into faith as trust. I think when many of us hear the word faith, we think about a set of beliefs. Is that true for anybody? YouTube, is that true for you? When you think about the faith, like that phrase, the faith, as if there's just one, and we all share it. Isn't that interesting? We have, in the modern world, since the 1500s, really since the 300s maybe, we have boiled faith down to a set of doctrines and dogmas that we must believe in and must affirm to be considered insider, to be considered orthodox, to be considered as having the right set of beliefs. And it doesn't seem like Jesus cares about that at all. Do you notice what Jesus doesn't do is Jesus doesn't say, look, here's the thing. I'm going to telemedicine this thing, but I need you to believe the right stuff first. I'm going to do what you asked, but I need you to sign off on this doctrinal statement. I want to help you. I really, really want to help you. But I need to know that you have it all figured out. That doesn't seem to be what Jesus is doing here. It seems like Jesus is going beyond doctrine and dogma and into faith as trust, because that is what the word faith means at its core. Faith is not a set of beliefs. Faith is not a set of doctrines and dogmas. At its best, and at its most, I think, Jesus-y, when we talk about faith, what we're talking about is trust. Listen to these words from, I know some of you are reading this book by John Shelby Spong, The Fourth Gospel, Tales of a Jewish Mystic. If you're not reading it, it's totally appropriate to order it right now. And we won't say a word about it. So here's what he says about this particular story. This official believed the word Jesus spoke to him and went on his way. Faith is not believing in creeds or doctrines or dogmas. Faith is trusting the divine presence to be in every moment, in every tomorrow. Faith is having the courage to walk into the unknown, to confront whatever life brings one's way without having our humanity destroyed in the process. There is no such thing as the faith. No claim by anyone to possess the only way to God, to be the single infallible authority empowered to speak for God, or to hold the only inerrant source of God's revelation is ever valid. Those things have been historically nothing more than human idols designed to provide us with the religious security for which our hearts yearn. Faith does not, cannot, and will not give us peace of mind, security, or certainty. Faith gives us only the courage to put one foot in front of the other and to walk into tomorrow with integrity, even though we know that in this world there is no peace of mind, no security, and no safety. Faith calls us to recognize that we are all in this quest we call life, and that our human defense barriers of tribe, race, ethnicity, and even gender and sexual identity cannot finally separate us from one another. Faith calls us to understand that to be human is to be part of who and what God is, and in the oneness of this God presence, to find that our understanding of life is enhanced and all human barriers fall into insignificance. I want to read that last part one more time. Faith calls us to understand that to be human is to be part of who and what God is. Think about that. To be human is to be part of who and what God is, not something over here trying to somehow eventually get there. Right now, human, you are a part of who and what God is. And in the oneness of this God presence, to find that our understanding of life is enhanced and all human barriers fall into insignificance. What does this sign point to? I think this sign points to that what the Gospel of John, the writer of John, what this person saw in the story of Jesus was an invitation to rethink what is possible. Was an invitation to rethink who is included. Was an invitation to be challenged. To have your assumptions about other human beings, your assumptions about God, your assumption about yourself, your assumption about the world, to have all of that challenged. You think this is impossible? What you don't know is that you are already, everything within you to be reborn is already there. The seeds have been planted. They just need awareness to grow. That the living water you thirst for is already within you, bubbling and springing up. You just have to prepare to drink. That God isn't somewhere else out there. That God is here, now, with us, in us, around us, through us. And that the invitation is to see this. And then when we see it, to open up our hearts and open up our brains and open up the possibilities within us that we could be transformed. Not into people who have all the right answers and have it all figured out, but into people who are on this journey making more and more room for new wine as it ferments and grows. Because what is a good wedding party without good wine? And I think that's what I think these first two signs are deeply interconnected, and maybe they all are. So maybe we're going to hear different versions of the same sermon over the next several weeks. But this is the truth. When we see this sign, and we see it not just with our eyes, but we see it with like the depths of our being, it makes everything possible. Anything is on the table. Transformation is a real possibility for every single one of us. Are you with me? And my hope for Grace Point Church, my hope for what we are doing in the world, is that we are regularly expanding with this reality we call God to continually dismantle and tear down boundaries and barriers that are keeping people from understanding and realizing how deeply beloved they already are. Are you with me? Let's pray. God, for this Jesus who calls us to an ever-expanding vision of what the word God means. For this Jesus who calls us to an ever-expanding vision of what it means to be human. For this Jesus who calls us to rethink what is possible. We are grateful. And we ask for eyes to see and hearts to embrace new life, new birth, not just once, but over and over and over again as we open ourselves to the possibilities that there's more to learn, that transformation is not a moment where the dump truck gets backed up and we get it all, but that transformation is a journey. And it's a journey of letting go and embracing. Give us wisdom to know what to let go and wisdom about what to embrace. Help us to trust that this living water we long for is already within us. That God isn't somewhere else, but that the reality the word God points to and invites us into is ever expanding, and it's right here with us, in us, rooting for us, longing for us to participate in the transformation of all things, including ourselves. And for all this, we're deeply grateful. And everybody said,
If I could breathe underwater, every fish would walk on land. If I could fly in the sky, baby, then wings would be on me. If words could move mountains, if I could swim the ocean without drowning, if there was pain without hurting, the impossible has been found. 'Cause baby, we can do more than we know.
More than we know.
And baby, baby, there's more than we know.
More than we know.
If I could moonwalk on the moon, I would glide to you, baby. I'd go to war like a platoon. I'd be right there on the front lines. No broken promises in the promised land. Let's let freedom set us free again. 'Cause baby, we can do more than we know.
More than we know.
And baby, baby, there's more than we know.
More than we know.
See, if we just stayed on the ground, then we would never see the stars. And if you're too afraid to walk in faith, then you will never know your heart. And if we just stayed on the corner, then we would never see the world. 'Cause baby, there's no fate we can't create. 'Cause baby, we can do more than we know.
More than we know.
And baby, baby, there's more than we know.
More than we know.
'Cause baby, we can do more than we know. Come on, sing it.
More than we know.
And baby, baby, there's more than we know.
More than we know.
Grace Point, as always, it's been wonderful being with you today. And remember today and every day that as you move on this earth and dance in this world, you get to function from approval and not for approval, because upon your creation, you were already pre-approved.
You're dismissed. Thank you. More than we know.
More than we know.
Baby, 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 yeah. There's more